about bullying, but I wanted to start by positioning bullying in a broader picture of school violence. And why this is important will become clear, as Hal probably has already for you by the end of the presentation. So, as we already heard this morning, what we call something, understanding something, is important for how we respond. So, when we define school violence and bullying, we are talking about all forms of violence that take place in and around schools that's perpetrated by students against other students, by teachers and other school staff against students, and perhaps also students against school staff as well. Bullying, of course, is speaking about unwanted or negative behavior, aggressive behavior, that's repeated over time. And it involves an imbalance of power, as we have already heard. School-related gender-based violence, and we've seen from Dr. Sampat's presentation about this, the high data of gender-based violence from the data set, involves acts or threats of sexual, physical, psychological violence occurring in and around schools. Also the result of gender norms and stereotypes and unequal power dynamics. And you see in the circles how they intersect with each other. More than one kind of violence can be happening at the same time. Okay. I don't think I need to say why this is an issue for education. It significantly negatively affects on children's mental health. It negatively affects their quality of life and their academic achievement, and it violates their right to education. From this global data, we can see how violence, especially bullying, impacts young people's health and well-being. So we see that children who are bullied are around twice as likely to feel lonely, to be unable to sleep at night, to have contemplated suicide as those who are not bullied. They are more likely to smoke, consume alcohol or cannabis, and start sex earlier than those who have not been bullied. Their self-reported quality of health, their reported quality of life satisfaction is much lower than those of children who have not been involved in bullying. They have a lower sense of belonging. There are also educational consequences, of course. There's higher absenteeism, higher school dropouts, and lower learning outcomes among children who have been bullied over an extended period of time. So I know that an important part of today's discussion is looking at responses and solutions, and from the evidence and strategies of what have been successful in many parts of the world, there are recommendations around the kinds of actions that are required to really make a difference. And these happen at the institutional level that benefit the school level. And UNESCO is very pleased to be able to work with partners like OPEC and RATAI and the Thai Media Foundation to do this work. And we work in these different kinds of areas around drawing attention to the data and helping to generate data and evidence around the situation of violence and bullying. Who is bullied? Where are they bullied? Why are they bullied? This data is important. Also advocating and raising awareness. So I'm going to speak now about two initiatives. The first is Connect with Respect, and the second, the Safe to Learn campaign. Connect with Respect, and I have a copy here, and we have copies available as well for distribution if you're interested. So Connect with Respect is a curriculum-based approach to preventing gender-based violence in and around schools. It is designed for teachers, especially for lower secondary, to build their knowledge and their awareness, as well as learning activities that teachers can use with their students to encourage their knowledge, positive attitude, and skills. It's designed for lower secondary, but the activities can be integrated into multiple subjects. And you can see the kinds of topics that it covers on gender equality, awareness of gender-based violence, looking at communicating for respectful relationships, how to build skills to seek help for oneself if they've experienced violence or for another person. UNESCO with OBEC collaborated in 2019 to carry out a very small pilot process. And I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Sampat here, who was very much involved. He led the training workshops of the material, and he also led the data analysis. So he's very familiar with this content because he helped to prepare it. So it involved implementing the material over a small amount of time, about 2 months, but starting with training in the how to use the tool, and also skills building in positive classroom management. So 5 schools were involved in the training workshops, and data collected from these 5 schools. A teacher exit questionnaire, a pre-implementation student survey. 2 schools would then go on to implement the program over 2 months, and then data was collected at the end of that time from those 2 schools to see if there was any change in attitudes and behaviors, and to see if the training was helpful to the teachers. So what did we learn? Let's start with the 5 schools and the data collected there, over 1,000 students. I'm going to talk about 4 areas where we have data. We see in terms of connectedness, 90% of students believed that they get along well with their classmates and that they were accepted, which is great. High levels of positivity, echoing a lot of the data we heard already. Relationship with their teachers, 41% reported experiencing physical punishment by teachers sometimes, while 39% witnessed a teacher physically punishing other students sometimes. So we can pay attention to that. In terms of experiencing violence, students report feeling safe, which is great, both at home and at school, but feel safer more at home. 30% of students report witnessing boys teasing another boy by saying he's like a girl sometimes, and witnessing boys making sexual comments about girls a few times. In terms of gender-based violence and help-seeking behavior, 72% of students would seek help if it happened to them at school, and 44% were not sure how to get help or where to get help for others. Students were most likely to seek help from a school counselor, followed by a teacher or parent, and least likely to seek help from a doctor or the internet. Still with the findings, what kind of impacts did we have? We had a lot of positive impacts after 2 months, only 2 months of implementing. We had a significant increase. Learners already started with high connectedness and collaboration, and that also continued. But in terms of other areas, we saw a decrease in learners' reported level of physical punishment by teachers. So learners reported receiving less punishment by teachers after the intervention. There was a decrease in all forms of violence experienced by learners. There was an increase among learners reporting that they were more likely to seek help for themselves and other students after they did the program. There was an increase among all students in learning about topics like these, about the effects of gender-based violence, about communicating about their feelings, and how to avoid joining in with bullying. Students valued and thought they had more value for these topics after the program. And the majority of learners felt that the program was valuable and should be made available to as many schools as possible. But there were some things that were not so great. First of all, even after the program, the interventions, students still held supportive attitudes that there were some occasions, there were some justifications for a man to beat his wife. Even after the program, there was no shift in some of those attitudes. There was still some physical punishment from teachers, not completely eliminated, but reduced. And both male and female students, their interest in learning about these topics remained high, but the value was higher among female learners than among male learners. So girls value this kind of education more than boys. It was high before the program, it stayed high after the program. So there is some gender variation in this kind of thing that we need to pay attention to. A quick look at some of the data from the 2 schools and contrast before and after the program. So in this question, in the past week, how often did students of the same or opposite sex tease you in a mean way? And mean teasing was the most common kind of bullying expressed, also similar to the data set we just heard. So before Connect with Respect program, teasing happened between 21 and 29% of learners of the time. And after the program, there were reductions in both opposite sex groups and same-sex groups. And the levels of teasing was higher in groups of the same sex rather than opposite sex. So we did see some reduction in teasing as one form of violence. This question, as we already mentioned, attitudes to wife beating, which is a really important, this is data that's collected in multiple surveys across the world. Do you believe it is right for a man to hit or beat his wife if he makes bad food, if she makes bad food, if she refuses to have sex with him, if she argues with him, if she ignores the children, if she goes out without telling him? What is very encouraging is that even before the program, most students felt that, for most of these reasons, it's not okay for a man to beat his wife. But both before and after, there were some students who felt, between around 20 and 25%, depending on the response, felt that yes, there are some times when it's okay for a man to beat his wife. So that, they didn't see any shift in that. So we want to be attentive to that, because it means then that those kinds of attitudes take more work to change. What did teachers think about the program? They felt that Connect with Respect and the training they received was either very effective or extremely effective in improving their knowledge of effective teaching strategies, including positive behavior management, as also it was useful in improving their confidence in how to use the material with their students. What do they have to say? A quote from one student saying that because of the program, we have better understanding of each other, and adults will have better understanding about gender and about how students and children feel in the family. And one quote from a teacher is that after the program, students accept each other more and accept other people's rights more. They collaborate, they have good relationships, and I, as a teacher, am changed myself. And I understand my students more, and my students feel better towards me. And this is really encouraging to have this kind of feedback from teachers after the program. Very briefly, I want to go on from Connect with Respect to another area of work, another collaboration that we're having with our dear colleagues at OBEC. And this is a global campaign called Safe to Learn, a multi-agency campaign that is aiming to eliminate all school violence across the world. And UNESCO, as part of this campaign, carried out a multi-country study to talk to teachers, to understand from them what they understood as their role in school violence and in preventing and responding to school violence. And there was a literature review, a global survey, and in Thailand, among 3 other countries, focus group discussions with teachers. So here's some findings from the focus group discussions in Thailand with Thai teachers. Teachers report that the most common types of violence that they witness are verbal, especially at primary school, and at secondary school, cyberbullying. In terms of teachers as perpetrators, teachers are involved in, they help foster the feelings of violence by blaming students, by making comparisons, by yelling, by lacking in giving encouragement, and this is what teachers say about themselves or how they observe other teachers in their practice. They note negative reinforcement, bringing in authority figures, but that these approaches and practices provide opportunities to reinforce behaviors and attitudes that are welcoming, if done correctly. And that they found that positive discipline practices and counseling and emotional management and showing other teachers support were very helpful. But they also observed that the teacher education curriculum needs more help, more work in terms of school violence. So I'm sure the e-learning course that's available now is going to be really, really well received when it goes to scale. And some quick quotes from teachers again, from the focus group discussions. One primary teacher is saying that in the event that students are being teased about their ability and physical appearance, teachers try to show the potential of students who are victims and assign tasks that increase their confidence. A second teacher saying that the most effective approach is counseling, and the counselor must reach the heart of that student rather than punishment. And it's so great to hear that most teachers are already using positive approaches. So to wrap up, to end, some key messages. And Dr. Sampat already summarized most of my key messages, so I'm just going to reinforce, thank you. But it's encouraging to see that the thinking on this is already the same. Key messages. We know that data on school violence and bullying is a cause for concern and a cause for action. School violence and bullying have gendered dimensions, and we can't have an effective response unless we take into account gender and the role of gender. A comprehensive response involves all of us. Connect with Respect showed us that not only is a curriculum response acceptable to teachers and students, but it's possible, it's feasible, and it actually demonstrates a positive impact. So that's very encouraging that curriculum-based responses can make a difference. We saw from the slide about wife beating that some types of norms and attitudes are harder to change. So education to change harmful social norms about gender and power has to start early when learners are young, before these norms are entrenched. And it has to be delivered consistently and with good quality. And more work needs to be done to raise awareness on what is violence, what constitutes violence. And teacher education and support needs to include adequate training on recognizing different kinds of violence and addressing different forms of violence, including the violence that happens when they are not in the room. Okay? And teachers need to be supported to develop their skills for effective learning, for social and emotional learning, as we see here. I'm happy to take any questions, but before I leave, I just wanted to draw your attention to November 5, which is the first International Day Against Violence and Bullying at School, including cyberbullying. This is a day that was endorsed formally by all UNESCO member states last year, and this year is the first commemoration. So we're looking forward to partnering with all of you to draw attention to this important activity and to raise the voices of teachers and students in addressing school violence and bullying. Kapanta.